On September 7th, 2017, Equifax, one of the 3 dominant credit reporting agencies in the U.S., reported a data breach affecting up to 143 million consumers. The data obtained in this breach is basic information each person uses to verify their identity with financial and government institutions. So the question is, how did this happen? What are the exposures to us as consumers? What can we do about it? And most importantly, is the internet technology that delivers so much value to all of us interwoven with weaknesses and vulnerabilities that can be used against us. My name is Jim Connor. Welcome to Game Changers Silicon Valley. In this segment, we will discuss the issues surrounding cybersecurity, protecting our digital identities, and what can be done to limit the spread of viruses, malware, and ransomware. My guests are Ken Elephant, Managing Director at Sorensen Capital, and TJ Rylander, a venture partner at Next 47, which is a Siemens venture capital platform. Ken and TJ, welcome to the show. Ken, let me start with you by asking your perspective on this massive breach at Equifax.
Yeah, unfortunately, Jim, this really is a massive breach, and every enterprise today is under attack. So if I'm a chief information security officer or a CEO of a large company, I should assume that I'm being breached. And the reason for that is because there's just so many different vulnerabilities today if you are an enterprise. Every different system that is connected to the internet is a vector of attack for these bad guys. And so with Equifax, I think you know, the vulnerability that was exploited was supposedly an Apache struts vulnerability. And so basically when there is a web app for the consumers to make a change to their credit report, this is what they were going into to enter in their information. And unfortunately, when this gets exploited, Equifax has a lot of other information that's in there.
Let me ask you a follow-up then. Do you think that there are many other public companies with financial data that have still have this exposure, or have they all patched it by now?
Well, I would hope that for this vulnerability, I think that every major enterprise has mobilized and patched this issue. The problem is that there's other vulnerabilities that pop up all the time. And if I'm an enterprise, I need to not only have the best technology, but I need to have the best people and the best processes to remediate against it.
Yeah. TJ, you've spent years now as a venture investor in the area of cybersecurity, cyber espionage, and so on like that. What is your perspective on this? Is this something that's going to change the way we allow companies to have our data, or what's your thoughts about that?
Yeah, unfortunately, Jim, I think it's been shown time and time again that utility and access to applications trumps security. So consumers, in most cases, are either unaware of or willing to put up with poor security in order to get access to applications and the utility that most of these web companies provide. That really means that the onus is on the companies and the security technology providers to deliver the security that these consumers deserve and need. So we look to things like increased liability at the board level, certainly terminations of execs that don't pay enough attention to cybersecurity needs as important drivers of corporate action and corporate spending to deploy these new technologies.
I was at the RSA show, and it's my sense that I don't know if any of these companies have a broader solution. It seems to be a piecemeal situation. Is that a correct
It's absolutely correct. It is one of the core challenges to growing an emerging cybersecurity startup. And Ken's done this as much as anybody in the industry. But the crux for most cybersecurity companies is to do one thing extremely well, because you have to be one of the best in the world and to be able to demonstrate that you're really effective in that context. But then in order to be a large company over time, you have to expand into other products. And it's that expansion that is usually what trips up young startups.
And the one thing that I'll add to that is that as there's new software infrastructure capabilities inside of enterprises, like today, the data centers are changing from virtualized environments to containers and microservices. So this is, unfortunately, a whole new paradigm for attackers to go after. And there's some really smart security startups that go into these new areas. That's where they have their initial wedge, and then ultimately they can broaden out. So what's happening is that in the old days, we used to have perimeter security, and that's where Check Point and Palo Alto Networks were born. Unfortunately, or fortunately, because there's so many good applications that are going cloud native, that old type of perimeter defense just doesn't work. So that's why we need to invest in these startups. Many of them will get an initial wedge and then be able to expand out, just like what TJ was saying.
What type of companies are you seeing that you like in the startup community that are providing cybersecurity? Is that the corporate level, the firewall level, or some other level?
Well, one of your themes that you were just talking about is, gosh, this must be very difficult for a chief information security officer, because they're managing 70 different products, and there's new startups that are coming all along. So there's a whole new class of companies that are automating the red team approach, and that's an area where I have not made an investment yet, but I do like a few companies in this area. The red team are the folks that are working for your company, and they're trying to penetrate your systems, just so that they can see if there are vulnerabilities out there. So, if Equifax was doing their job, their red team should have been trying to exploit Apache, because they know that there's a known vulnerability there.
Apache being the operating system of the web servers, that was one vulnerability. And what about the client side of all these machines coming in, and of course the corporate? As I understand it, a lot of these viruses get into the network and they sit there and they hide there for years or for months, we'll say, and then they start to spread around. And this attack takes place over a period of time where suddenly all these machines are affected. It's been undetected. Is that an area that you see companies addressing today?
Yeah, I would say, like, if you look at the Verizon breach report, they would say that the average attack for a persistent threat is that they are in your network for over 9 months. Now, in Equifax, it looks like it was actually less than 3 months. So actually, in terms of the time that the attackers were there, they were there for a lot less than the average. And so what the attackers are doing is they go and get access into one system, either one endpoint, or they go into one server, and then they try and propagate from there until they find either really good information or access to an important person's computer, and then apply ransomware to it. That is really how these attacks spread inside the enterprise.
So I'll go back to you, TJ, because I want to ask this question really of both of you. You may comment differently, but I had the perception as an average person reading the news, watching the blogs, that an intrusion was made, and suddenly in a very short time, the attackers were able to get into the databases, which have another level of security in them, and find the various tables and find the data very quickly. And I'm going, wow, this sounds like an inside job. It has to be, but in fact, they've had months to work on it.
In fact, it's really interesting. When we see some of the most effective attacks, they're often called low and slow, and that implies the slow rate of penetration and movement throughout these networks that helps the attacker evade the cybersecurity defenses that exist today. So by slowing down their attack, they're able to be more effective. Now you're at Siemens being a German company, and you were at Incatel before. Are you continuing the work you did at Incatel at Siemens? Still making venture investments. Siemens is a very strong platform that has expanded into very significant venture investments in lead positions, in addition to the very successful corporate venture motion that it's perfected over the last 15 years.
And is it strategic, or is it purely an open investment environment?
We are charged with investing effectively from a financial standpoint, but the reason for doing so is to help the overall Siemens business understand innovation that's coming maybe a little bit over the horizon. So helping to imagine what the business environment will look like 5 or 10 years down the road and be ready for that.
Do you need to work with the product managers or the business units to be sure that they're connected to this technology?
We certainly do, and I'd say that the value add that we bring to the companies we invest in, the portfolio companies, is that insight and the relationships we have back into the Siemens organization. our goal is to co-invest with other great investors like Sorensen Capital, where Ken is, or Google Ventures, or any others that we come across on a daily basis.
So Ken, you've moved to Sorensen recently. You were at Intel for 10 years, was that correct?
Yeah, about 6 years.
Oh,
and then
6 years,
before
yeah.
that.
What led you to leave Intel?
Oh, I loved Intel Capital. And just like what TJ was saying about a lot of the value add that Siemens can bring, Intel Capital was extremely good at getting startups connected with Global 2000 companies. So when I made an investment in like a Forescout or an Alien Vault, we could really help them get in with the right channel partners and customers initially. And so we're taking a lot of that capability at Sorensen Ventures, and when we invest in startups, we're trying to help add value specifically on the customer connections. For me, I've always in my heart been an entrepreneur, and I am going to continue to partner with really good firms like Intel Capital or Next 47. But this was a chance in a lifetime to work with a firm and a really good colleague to start up my own little firm.
People often ask me, how much time and advice and coaching and perhaps influence does a VC firm, or does a VC partner, because you're going to be a partner, put into the company? I'll ask you for your experience. You spend a lot of time. Do you limit your board roles to maybe 7 or 8 companies, or?
Yeah. So we're only going to be on 6 boards or less for precisely this reason. And from my point of view, the way that a venture person can work with a startup, there's really like 3 or 4 key ways. The first way is to kind of be your own recruiting firm, because every company needs a really good advisor, or they need a really good VP of marketing at a certain point in time. We're kind of our own mini investment bank for these startups as well, because when they're raising their next round of funding, we want to make sure that they go to the right venture group for that situation at that point in time. And we also want to help them exit. We're also like a mini McKinsey, where we can see market trends and we can help them with their product market fit. And then lastly is what we just talked about, connecting them initially with customers and partners. That's where I think the real, at least from Sorensen Ventures, that's where the real value add is. And it comes in waves.
And what level do you engage? Is it at the very seed level, the first round, or do you wait till there's some, maybe $1 million been raised among some other investors?
Yeah, we're typically the first institutional money in. So we may be the absolute first money, or there may be some angel money, but we're typically the first institutional money in.
Right. Siemens, what is the model there?
So we are stage agnostic, so we look for opportunities along the different stages, either first capital in or later stage. And to your question about our interaction with the portfolio companies, we do look to bring that Siemens-specific expertise and connections through Siemens into its customers to bear in our portfolio. We also get involved, especially at the early stage, in the same ways that Ken described. And so become active directors and coaches for the management team.
So let me just go into the personal story a little bit. Ken, how did you get into the business? I mean, you were an entrepreneur at one point, right?
Yeah, my first job out of undergrad was working at Apple's software subsidiary called Claris. And then I went to a small public company called Radius. And after business school, I was really intrigued with what venture capital was all about. Not only from the entrepreneurship point of view, but also how do you actually help these companies? And so I was fortunate enough to get into venture at Battery Ventures through this program called the Kauffman Fellows Program.
Oh, yeah. Good. And TJ, your experience?
I actually came out of business school and spent a few years consulting, and that was a great learning experience, but it was working with large companies, and so it did not scratch the itch I had of working with small tech-focused venture-backed startups. I had the opportunity to join the team at InQtel back in 2006, and I was intrigued by the intersection between technology-based startups and the elements of the U.S. government that InQtel works with. It was a fantastic experience and one that taught me a ton.
Let's go ahead and let you give your contact information for anybody in the audience that would like to follow up. I'll start with you, TJ.
Thanks, Jim. So my contact information, the easiest way is email, and that's tj.rylander, which is RYLANDER at next47.com.
And Ken?
Yeah, and I'm Kelefant, which is KELEFANT at sorensencap.com.
Great. Well, I really want to thank both of you. It's been great having you on the show, learning about cybersecurity, your perspective, and kind of how deep this problem is, as well as your personal stories of what you guys have been doing in the venture community here in Silicon Valley. So thanks again for being here, and I wish you every success going forward.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks, Jim.
This is Jim Connor. Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of Game Changers Silicon Valley. Each week we'll address an area of innovation that may emerge as a game changer of tomorrow. You can contact us or subscribe to the shows at gamechangers.tv. We look forward to your continued interest and participation in upcoming shows.